Hey everyone, this is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at Jupiter's retrograde back into Aquarius, and we're going to talk about what that transition might look like depending on your rising sign. I'm also going to go through the overall timeline of Jupiter in Aquarius, when it entered, when it retrograded into Pisces, when it went back into Aquarius, how long it's going to be in Aquarius before it goes back into Pisces. So we'll kind of get a feel for the entirety of the Jupiter Aquarius cycle, especially for the rest of this year. And we'll just kind of do a recap on where it's been and how you might also track it based on the rising sign of your chart. Now, we're using whole sign houses, which means that this is designed to track according to the way that your birth chart looks in whole sign houses, which means you need to pay attention to your rising sign in particular in this video. So I'm going to go ahead and put it up on the screen, and we'll walk through the cycle first, just sort of see where we've been. I really should have done this probably in late July when Jupiter retrograded back into Aquarius, but better late than never. So let's just take a look. Here is Jupiter in the sign of Aquarius. It's retrograde right now at about 28 degrees of Aquarius. And what I'm going to do is take this back in time. So we're going to go back. We'll go back to clear this out. We'll go back to the beginning of the year and take a look at the actual transition and when it occurred. So you can see that Jupiter moves into Aquarius right around December 18th into the 19th of 2020. Remember, we had the big Jupiter and Saturn conjunction at that time. Here, I'll circle it for you again so you can see it. So there's Jupiter moving into Aquarius right around the winter solstice of 2020. So that's about the time where you should have felt the transition in your birth chart. And we're going to talk about what that looked like again for each rising sign in a minute. So that's the beginning. We're going to take this forward now, and Jupiter's diving into Aquarius. Actually goes through the entire sign of Aquarius coming into May. So once we get to May of 2021, we see that transition from Jupiter in Aquarius to Jupiter into Pisces right around May 13th. Here you can see Jupiter having moved into Pisces right around the 13th. Okay, so that's December 20th, 2020, all the way to about May 13th, we got a taste for Jupiter in Aquarius. Now we see Jupiter give us a taste for what it's going to be like in Pisces, and we tracked that transit. If you go back into my previous videos, look up Jupiter in Pisces, you'll see me take that through all 12 signs. If we take this forward all the way, it starts retrograding into the late, I think it's about late June, and then it comes out of the sign of Pisces by late July. So we're seeing it retrograde back into Aquarius around July 27th into the 28th. Now it's in the sign of Aquarius again. So here you can see this is just late July that it came back into Aquarius. If we take Jupiter, through the rest of the year, you're going to see that Jupiter is going to spend quite a bit more time this year in Aquarius. It goes all the way down to about 22 degrees of Aquarius, and it will station to turn direct again. Here it is, right about October 17th, at which point then for the rest of the year, it's going direct and moving back toward Pisces. And you're going to actually see the transition of Jupiter into the sign of Pisces around late December. So here it is. You can see Jupiter just reaching into Pisces by December 28th. You can see it right there at 29:59. If I go forward, probably just like an hour. Yeah, it's probably going to, there it is. So it switches by, like late in the evening Eastern time on December 28th, goes back into Pisces. So between late July and late December, Jupiter's back in Aquarius. And then if you wanted to track it forward next year, you'd see Jupiter in Pisces to start the year. It takes us all the way till about May, again, when Jupiter flies into Aries for a bit. So we kind of repeat the back and forth cycle. Jupiter spends about 12 years going through the whole zodiac, so about a sign a year. You get about a year worth of Jupiter in each sign. Okay, anyway, so the purpose of doing all of this today is to refresh on what Jupiter has been up to, because sometimes you can lose track of it. And I find that doing a little retrospective from time to time is really helpful. So let's go ahead and take a look at Aries on the ascendant. And I'm going to eliminate everything in the chart but Jupiter. So we're just going to kind of focus on Jupiter in our visual field of the chart here. So if you are an Aries, you've seen Jupiter go into the 12th house. And again, if you wanted to know more about Jupiter in Pisces and what that's been like, take a look at the video that I made back in, I think it was probably about May, maybe even April, where we take a look at all 12 signs and what Jupiter is like in all 12 signs. So we're not going to do that today. What I'm going to do is refresh on Jupiter going into Aquarius. So Jupiter is now popping back into your 11th house, which is where it was to start the year. The 11th house, if you're an Aries, is going to be focused on friends, groups, allies, colleagues. It was called the house of good spirit and the joy of Jupiter. If you think about what that means, it really has to do with what does spirit mean? Let's start with that. And what does Jupiter have to do with spirit? And good spirit at that, because the 12th house is called bad spirit. Well, one of the things that we know about the 11th, about the concept of spirit, is that it has to do with action, intention, and an ideal that is directing our actions. I want to get good at something, or I want to have this kind of life or this kind of marriage or whatever it might be. It's the joy, the good, the hope, the wish. The 11th house, not surprisingly, was the place of wishes and dreams, meaning aspirations, longings. So anything or anyone that becomes a resource, an asset, an ally, a colleague, a helpful influence, a good spirit that aids us toward our ambitions or the realization of our dreams or wishes would be associated with the 11th house. So when people say it's the house of groups, not entirely accurate. It's groups insofar as a group would be a part of aiding or assisting us in our wishes or aspirations. Part of this is because the planet is moving upward in the sky toward the top of the sky, but has not yet reached that place. And so it's aspiring toward the summit of the heavens. So if you have Jupiter in Aquarius right now, the retrograde is interesting. I'm not going to comment so much on the retrograde, but it can mean, just generally for all signs, all houses, it can mean that there are revisions, reversals, or revisiting of things that maybe came in the first part of the year between, late December of 2020 and May of 2021. But anyway, it's a time of review or re-examining these topics. Who are your allies? Who are your friends? What are your wishes and long-term dreams or hopes? What kind of people are you associating with as you explore those hopes and wishes for your future? So a lot of emphasis on that. And Jupiter brings good opportunities. This is Jupiter's joy. If you're an Aries rising, it's a pretty good place for Jupiter. All things considered, you should be looking for beneficial people and influences, or revising or reconsidering who or what is a good asset or resource to aid you in the accomplishment of your dreams and goals. So that could be social in nature, but it's sort of like taking stock of what you have to help you. All right, so let's go forward from here to Taurus rising. So if we put Taurus on the ascendant, then we're going to see Jupiter in the 10th house. Now, this place was called Praxis. The word for that in the Indian tradition would be karma, or you could even say artha. In a sense, we're looking at a place that's associated with our worldly power, success, ambition, achievements, accomplishment, duties, professional life. But more broadly speaking, anything that we do as an everyday action, as an everyday activity out in the world, where our reputation or our role is more socially defined. for example, even if you're at home, you're a mother. Well, insofar as, your people know you to be a mother who, stays at home and maybe homeschools or takes care of the kids or whatever the case might be, still be a 10th house activity for a lot of people. So it's pretty broad application. It's what you're doing. It's what your role is that the role that you're playing in a sense societally, how you think of yourself and what your activities are. And so it can be professional life, but more broadly speaking, it's what you practice every day. It's literally what you do every day. So Jupiter in this house can bring blessings and benefits and accomplishment and achievement, a little bit of the retrograde. Maybe there's some revisions going on or some reconsideration of what you're doing professionally, or something from the past that's coming back. So the retrograde can be, sometimes indicative of something particular from the past because of the backward motion, but also generally a time of growth, expansion, revisiting, reviewing things, and expansion for Jupiter in the 10th it's one of its better placements. So this is Saturn's co-present right now, in that house. So for all signs, we're talking about a little bit of a Saturnine influence at the same time. So expansion and contraction a little simultaneously in the career area, maybe. Yeah, it's a good planet to have in your career house at the moment. It'll be there offering blessings and benefits really through the end of the year at this point. So let's go forward to Gemini rising. If you're Gemini rising, Jupiter's falling in the 9th house. Now, the 9th house was called God, and it was called the joy of the sun. And it's related to our guiding beliefs, higher learning, knowledge, but more broadly speaking, wisdom. Knowledge of skills or things that you learn that you have to go to school for. It's also associated with travel and the broadening of your horizons, and also the expansion of your mind and spirit. So it could be Jupiter in the 9th could imply that you're going through a period of reconsidering or shifting beliefs or values politically, philosophically, spiritually, or religiously, academically. There could be important teachers in your life right now, or the importance of education or learning. But also the 9th house is a place of foreign countries and long journeys. And so perhaps there's some blessings or benefits coming in through other places or foreign cultures or something like that. This is a pretty good placement for Jupiter. The retrograde could indicate, again, something from the past, something's being revisited or reconsidered, but overall, it's a blessing to have Jupiter there. Saturn could bring a little bit more of a serious vibe into this house right now, a little bit more contractive, but it's nice to have Jupiter there sort of balancing things out. Now, if you are a Cancer rising, if you're a Cancer rising, then Jupiter is falling along with Saturn into your 8th house. And the nice thing about Jupiter in the 8th house is that there are often benefits or blessings that come from other people or from a spouse or partner. So it's the house that often, when Jupiter's in, especially pertains to like inheritance or blessings or benefits financially that come from someone else. Or it could also imply going into debt or spending a lot, or there's different sort of bills that are due. So if you think of income and expenses that are related to other people or entities, like taxes or bills that are owed somewhere, or a loan that's taken out, or things that come in from other people, a fortunate connection that raises your salary or something like that, or someone that gives you money when they pass. So Jupiter has there's definitely the connotation of blessings coming from other people, as well as debts that come from other people and that are being, maybe debts that are being paid off emotionally or karmically. But I like Jupiter in the 8th, to me, is like a good sign of there being, blessings and benefits that come through other people with a little bit of hard work attached, given that it's in Saturn's sign. This could also be something about revisiting old patterns or old patterns of indebtedness. How do we tend to get ourselves into debt, emotionally, financially, physically, psychically? How do we tend to get ourselves in a hole? And what are the most effective methods that we've had for getting out of a hole? those are the kinds of things that I think Jupiter could give us a lot of insight about if you're a Cancer rising right now. Now, also the topic of death and loss and the silver lining that's available right now with Jupiter in the eighth. So for example, sometimes there's real losses that come in when Jupiter is in the eighth house. But then there's a benefit that comes alongside of it somehow as an inheritance, but other things too. Sometimes when people leave us and it's like a karmic load is suddenly lifted. So some lightness there, even if there are some losses involved with which the eighth house sometimes brings. I think of the eighth house as a place of debt and death. Death being the ultimate debt that we all owe in a sense. So when Jupiter's there, it brings blessings and benefits around the topic of loss or debt or death. So it's like I had a Jupiter transit in the eighth house once, and ended up someone passed that I knew, but I ended up inheriting something from them, and it was really surprising. Wasn't anticipating it at all. So it was not big, but it was still something, and that happened to be Jupiter transiting through my eighth house. All right, let's go to Leo rising. So for Leo, Jupiter along with Saturn are in your seventh house. So there's been a lot of growth and probably seriousness simultaneously, the expansion, contraction, alternation of Jupiter and Saturn in the marriage house. So marriage, relationships, anything that's a closer, even business partnership sometimes will be associated with the seventh house. Jupiter coming back into that house could mean that there's, the first part of the year, there might have been a lot of emphasis on growth coming in through relationships. And now there's, kind of a revisitation of those same themes. It's kind of serious when Saturn's in the seventh. People get married or people get divorced. They make life-changing, serious commitments, or they get out of commitments. But it's not light stuff usually when Saturn's in the seventh. There's a more contractive, long-term impact that Saturn has in the seventh house. We grow a lot and we learn a lot through relationships, and Saturn's in the seventh. Well, isn't it nice to have Jupiter there simultaneously? Because Jupiter's going to bring that buoyancy and that sense that things are growing even as they're contracting. So look for kind of again, I would call it almost like a silver lining if there's been any challenges around relationships, especially since about the winter solstice of last year. So that is for Leo risings. Watch for the growth, the blessings, and the emphasis on relationships right now until the end of the year. Let's go ahead and put Virgo on the ascendant. If you're putting Virgo on the ascendant, then Jupiter's coming into your sixth house. Now, the sixth house was called the joy of Mars, and it was called the house of bad fortune. And it's really not as bad as it sounds. If you think about it, the sixth house is the chop wood, carry water house. It's a house that has a lot to do with the difficulties and the persistence and hard work needed for anything good to get done in our lives, really. Whether you want to, develop muscle or strength or better, cardio health, you have to run or lift weights or whatever. And it's hard, and you have to persevere, and it's kind of, there's like effort involved. It's not easy. It's not like a Venus ruled house, which we'll talk about in the next sign with Libra rising, where, you're going to see Jupiter in the fifth house, which is called the joy of Venus, in the house of good fortune. The house of bad fortune just means that there's struggle involved. And for the ancients, bad fortune didn't mean like evil. It just meant like you have to work all day in the hot sun, or there's kind of like, it's a house that's, for example, associated with the military and with warriors and soldiers and fighting for things that you believe in or serving causes that you would even die for. But it's also associated with slavery, servitude, and chronic illness. So anyway, the point is that when you have Jupiter in this house, there can be, sometimes there's going to be, again, a silver lining, like you're dealing with things that are tough or difficult, but they're uplifting you, or they're bringing some kind of benefit, or you're able to overcome them. It's not even necessarily that some benefit comes, just the benefit is that something that could be bad isn't as bad as it really should have been. Should, I guess, is a weird word, but Jupiter can be definitely like a little angel watching over you with the challenges, struggles, hard work, perseverance, frustrating situations that the sixth will bring up. It can also be a sign that, something you believe in is being amplified. and that you feel more intensely about things that you believe in. Jupiter in the sixth can be like that too. All right, let's go forward and put Libra on the ascendant. Jupiter will be in the fifth house now. So Jupiter in the fifth is called the joy of Venus. The fifth house was the joy of Venus in the house of good fortune. So this house has a lot more to do with the pleasant, pleasing, enjoyable things. You've got things like procreation, romance, sexuality, children, creativity, the arts, going out to a restaurant, like anything that would be just really about ease, pleasure, sensual enjoyment, creativity, theatricality, performance, dance, even having fun, like playing a sport, even though sports isn't really a fifth house thing, but just the joy of like playing something, playing an instrument. So that this is the house of Venus, that the place of good fortune. And good fortune would just mean like stuff that's relatively pleasing, subjectively you enjoy it. So Jupiter in this house, awesome. There can be romance, there can be joy derived from children, there can be joy derived from the arts. There, it's usually there's kind of like an abundance around the joy, the pleasure. Sometimes, of course, you're going to go too far. Like you'll see sometimes people take up drinking or gambling or something like that with Jupiter in the fifth, almost going to an extreme. And Saturn in this house with Jupiter simultaneously can be a real push and pull. Maybe you're having, if you're a Libra rising right now, maybe you're having to look at your relationship with pleasure and how easily you're able to sort of let go and enjoy things versus taking things too seriously. And that can be kind of a push-pull between Saturn and Jupiter in that house. At any rate, look at those topics being really activated, probably in a very positive way. Maybe there's some revisitation of the past, some revisions that are being done around these topics with Jupiter in that house because of its retrograde as well. All right, let's go forward to Scorpio on the ascendant. With Scorpio on the ascendant, we're going to see Jupiter entering the fourth house again, and the fourth house being a place that has to do with our roots. So land, property, family, anything that serves to prop up our life and support us, like the foundation of a house would. So foundational things. Well, Jupiter in that house along with Saturn can mean that there's, again, an alternation of contraction and expansion. Saturn in that house can mean that there's, pretty serious, like you're remodeling a house, for example, or there's death in the family, or there's a sense of like dealing with heavier family karmic patterns from the past or something like that. You could even think of like being homeless or being between homes or feeling homeless or not knowing where you're going to live or something like that, right? Saturn in that house can be like a little bit harder. There can be like deeper, more challenging themes around your parents in particular, or family drama or something like that. That's all Saturn stuff in the fourth. Jupiter is going to add some lightness, and Jupiter is going to add the feeling of hope. And again, maybe a little bit of a buffer, or that something good is coming out of the challenges right now around home and family, or that there's sort of a contraction, expansion, back and forth around these topics. The weird thing is that Jupiter in the fourth will often bring new life into the family, and Saturn will bring death. So sometimes there's like grandma passes, but then a baby is born. You'll see that kind of like alternation between the expansion of the family and the contraction of the family, if that makes sense. But anyway, watch for those two energies to be working with one another now until the end of the year, maybe revisiting something from the past or something that happened earlier in the year, kind of going back to themes that were prevalent between the start of the year and up to about May. All right, let's put Sag on the ascendant. So if you're Sag rising, Jupiter's going to be having retrograded into your third house. Now that place was called the joy of the moon. It was called Dia, or goddess. And it is associated with everything environmental. So the moon is like the mood ring in the sky. And so the third house is like the house that is like the mood ring. People who have strong placements in the, I have my sun and Mercury in the third house. Oftentimes people are really dialed into and more aware of influences in the environment. Well, here we're looking at the challenging influences in the environment with Saturn in your third house right now, or the harder and more like more like mentally rigid, potentially, qualities around you or in your own mind or mood. Um, it's a more serious time mentally, but also a time of surveying the big picture. So a lot of like kind of vast, big mental constructs when Saturn's in Aquarius in the third house, or learning systems of information or knowledge, or some kind of paradigm change in your mind and how you perceive things. Well, Jupiter's going to add some lightness to that, which is nice, because Saturn in the third, you could be writing a book or going to school, but there's just more of a long, slow, hard, and maybe even somewhat distant mental, airy quality with Saturn there. On the other hand, Jupiter again is going to add that lightness and buoyancy and a little bit more inspiration, enthusiasm. And also, Jupiter in the third house may help you to mobilize thoughts a little bit more, rather than staying a little too stuck or a little too isolated in your thoughts. So I like this as an energy that's starting to stimulate mental growth and change for you if you're a Sag rising. Even in the charts of like little kids, like, they're going to school in the fall. They've been used to social distancing. They're going to be back, in school, maybe get reacclimating to school or something like that. I'm just making this up, but so watch for those environmental shifts with Jupiter in the third, and especially how they impact your mind, your mood. Watch for Jupiter and Saturn in the kind of in the environment around you, like the water is to the fish. Now, go to the second house if you're a Cap rising. And did I get that right? Hold on. Yeah. We go. Oops, I'm going backwards. Let's go forward. So if you are a Capricorn rising, we're going to see this in your second house. Now, Saturn's in your second house as well. So you're talking again about the contractive versus sort of expansive energies around a place that has to do with your own personal resources. Could be anything from diet to money to inherent skills that you have that could be used for your benefit or in order to support you, starting businesses or developing skills within a job, anything to do with money or assets, even again, anything that you would own or possess or buy or purchase or invest in. Saturn there is a little bit more serious. It's a good Saturn. Saturn's in its own sign, so it's like pretty positive Saturn overall. But it's nice to have Jupiter alongside of it, because Saturn in the second can be a little bit more contractive around money and finances and things like that, whereas Jupiter is going to offer that more expansive and abundant energy. So you watch for there to be maybe like a little bit of a lift coming back in if things have been heavy for a little bit around money or finances. It can also mobilize changes that you've been slowly working toward around money, finances, business, skill development, things like that. Meaning that if there's been something that's slowly been developing, Jupiter suddenly helps it pick up the pace and get going. You could start to see results around things that you've been working on for a while, return on, investments, things like that. All right, if you are an Aquarius rising, this is in your first house. Now, Jupiter and Saturn are there together. So the main thing is that when Saturn's in your first house, it's a time of personal mastery, of facing hard realities, especially about yourself, your health, your appearance, your vitality, your psychology, and maturing. But also sometimes, kind of hitting your walls and having to work through them. And Jupiter should offer, again, like a lift. Jupiter should help you feel like I can overcome personal limitations, personal fears, personal insecurities. I can change my body. I can change my appearance in ways that reflect the way that I'm evolving as a spirit soul. And the confidence maybe that I need to work through a heavier period, lift or relief if you've been dealing with physical health challenges. So Jupiter there should grant sort of confidence. Now, one thing to be careful of is Jupiter can inflate you a little bit in the first house. So you want to be careful of like eating too much or getting cocky or kind of like overdoing things. But generally speaking, I love that Jupiter's coming back into the first house for Aquarians. It just gives a lift it's your ruling planet if you're an Aquarius rising anyway. So you're familiar with Saturn, but it's nice to have Jupiter in the mix because Saturn tends to be a planet that focuses, it's a via negativa, it focuses on the way forward is through a lot of negation, discipline, restraint, contraction. So to have Jupiter lifting a little bit in there now until the end of the year is nice. All right, let's go forward to Pisces rising, last but not least. So Pisces rising, you've got Jupiter in your 12th house. Now, with Saturn in the 12th as well, I have to say that if you're a Pisces rising, Saturn in the 12th is, how can you describe it? It's a period of time where people can go into solitude. They can become more introverted. They can need to distance themselves from the world a little bit more, or there can be something more, almost like more monastic or hermit-like that's coming in. Those would all be the positives: a spiritual discipline, more time for quiet, focused things, places where you can refine things very deeply. Also, sometimes it can be isolating and lonely having Saturn in the 12th. So having your ruling planet Jupiter pop in there can be nice because, again, it can lift things a little bit. It can bring a quiet joy or an internal expansion that nobody else is seeing. On the other hand, one of the things you have to be careful about with Jupiter and Saturn in the 12th is going to be the potential for because Jupiter, again, is your ascendant ruler, the potential for your own shadows and blind spots to have more severe consequences at this time in your life. And that would have happened already through the first part of the year. So don't let your blind spots, drive you into the ground right now. That would be the biggest warning. But also sometimes you need to drive yourself into the ground in order to, you have to hit rock bottom sometimes in order to make changes. I can't tell you how many times, for example, I've seen Jupiter in the 12th house, and not just a Pisces rising chart, but any chart, when a person, starts going to a 12-step program, something like that. And that's a little depressing for some people out there. Like, okay, well, give me something else here. The other possibility would be that that you lose yourself a little bit only to find yourself, or that there's some needing to distance yourself in order to reorient and get back to what feels true and real and right to you. Now, that could be in jobs and in any area of your life. That could be in relationships. But watch for this also by the end of the year to have been really well worth it, because then Jupiter's going to pop into your first house, and it's a time of great personal growth and expansion. So whatever the deeper inner work you're doing right now, that'll make a pretty big shift by the end of the year, and you'll see significant lightening. All right, that takes us through all 12 signs. I hope that this was useful for you, just kind of revisiting what Jupiter in Aquarius is like and where you should be noticing Jupiter right now in your own chart. So feel free to leave your comments in the comments section. If you have any stories you'd like to share, put #grabbed and tell us the transit Jupiter into Aquarius. What house? What's the story? I'd love to feature you in one of the upcoming episodes. So don't write anything you don't mind that you don't want me to read. I won't use your name. If you prefer to email us, you can always write to us, grabbed@nightlightastrology.com. We don't respond to those emails. We just use the text that you send us for the grabbed episodes. So we'll see what your stories are. I'd love to hear how these land in the house, based on your rising sign, what stories you have to share that match up with the house topics we discussed. It's always fun to hear those stories. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend, and we will see you guys next week. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.